Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. For those who don't know me, my name is David. I'm the president of the University of St. Thomas College Republicans. We have a great evening for you planned tonight. As you know, Dr. Scott Jensen is here to speak. Before I say any of that, we have two quick disclaimers we are required to say with the university. First off, this event is organized solely by the UST College Republicans without the support or endorsement of the University of St. Thomas. The University of St. Thomas does not participate in political campaigns on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. And also the second thing too as well, guys, as for UST quality, masks are required for this event. We appreciate your patience with us. I'd like to give a quick special thanks to all the officers we had working on this event, making it happen. So if you're here tonight, Professor Lemons, if you please rise, just to be acknowledged. Peter, Frankie, Gwen, Sebastian. Let's just give them a hand for all the great work they did. Also, if you guys haven't already, feel free to follow us on social media. We are on, we're having technical difficulties, on Instagram and Twitter. I say that because, so as I'm sure many of you know, the UST has updated their COVID vaccine requirements. Not only are they continuing with that vaccine requirement, but they are no longer allowing conscientious objections to that requirement. So it's it's an issue, but the University of St. Thomas believes that students should not be forced to choose between their own education and their moral beliefs. And they could be taken, an action can be taken for this. As per Minnesota Statute 135A, statute immunization, essentially what the statute says is according to the state of Minnesota, private four-year universities are required to have conscientious objections for their students. So there is a potential for them reversing this, and that's something that we're working on. We're standing against the university for imposing this requirement, and so yeah. Before I introduce the speaker for this evening, I'd like to say a few quick words about why I think our club is so important, and why, if you haven't already, I think that University of St. Thomas students should join the College Republicans. When I was a freshman coming here, I saw nothing but liberal professors, liberal media, liberal faculty, and I couldn't help but feeling like I was alone. But the more I got to talking to people around, and the more I got to speaking with my students, my classmates, I realized that a lot of them thought just like I did. They thought, I'm just going to get through my four-year university, I'm going to keep my head down, I'm not going to cause trouble. But I don't know if you've been paying attention to current events lately, but if there's been any time in our country's history when we shouldn't just keep our heads down, I think it's right now. I think it's important that students on campus not feel...
Can you speak up, please?
Sorry.
Our viewers online are having trouble hearing.
Okay. I believe that students on campus should not feel afraid to voice their opinions, not only to their fellow students, but to the professors, to their faculty. And they shouldn't feel afraid for having conservative views, maybe believing that government should be small, things like that. And not to mention, we're a Catholic university. The University of St. Thomas has repeatedly demonstrated that their faculty is sometimes in conflict with Catholic values. And that's something that I think the University of St. Thomas College Republicans needs to be an active voice on campus, and that's a big reason why I feel that way. So if you feel like I do, if you're a student here, feel free to join the College Republicans. If you're not a student here, feel free to follow us on social media for events like this. So, without further ado, I apologize for technical difficulties. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Scott Jensen. Dr. Scott Jensen has been in a position for over 40 years. He was a former Minnesota State Senator, and he is currently running to be the next governor of Minnesota. So please give it up for our keynote speaker.
Can you hear me in the back okay? Technically, you can hear me as well?
Let's see.
10, 9, 8,
yeah.
7, 6?
Yeah, if you could just speak up a little bit. I see people commenting saying that it's a little muffled.
Okay, well, we'll give it a try, and if we have to do better, we will. Folks, I really appreciate you coming out tonight. Edmund Burke said, "The only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing." Obviously, you're not doing nothing. You're here. You're here tonight. I don't know if you're aware of it, but 25 times in a row, the conservative movement has lost in Minnesota in statewide elections. 25 times in a row. When I say that, I hope the question running through your head is, what does conservative actually mean? Conservative comes from the Latin term conservare, and it means to safeguard. Conservative doesn't mean that you're taking a political position or you're over here or you're over here on the political spectrum. It means to safeguard. You're trying to safeguard the best within us. I talked to a few of you before we started, and I said, I can't imagine the college experience that you have had with this fractured set of policies that seem to govern your lives in a way that you might never have expected. And these policies frequently change from week to week, not necessarily with any science backing them up, but just because. I never had that kind of experience in college. So, what exactly are we seeing, you and I, as we look at the world around us today? So different than 2 years ago. I think we're seeing a level of lawlessness that we could never have imagined. We're seeing streets and fun venues that we wouldn't have thought twice about going to. We wonder, should we do that? What should we do to protect ourselves? That's a genie that got out of the bottle that's not easily going to be put back in. The fact of the matter is, public safety involves the word crime in my mind, C-R-I-M-E. It starts with crime. The C stands for cops. Cops aren't the enemy. They're the people who teach our kids Little League. They might well go to church with us. We might see them down at the bar for a beer and a burger. These are our neighbors. Are cops perfect? Heavens no. Are they undergoing reform? Always. I would never want the American Medical Association to be the platform from which you would judge me. Cops don't want to be judged in the wrong fashion either. For that matter, neither do teachers. We judge too easily. We judge too casually. But we need cops on the street corners. And we need to know that they're constantly trying to be their best. There will be bad apples. One of the largest departments in Medicare is the fraud department. And it isn't because patients are defrauding Medicare, it's because of doctors and clinics and hospitals. We have a powerful ability to rationalize what we do. We can do something that brings in more income. And if we really look at it, we might say, that's probably not quite the way the system was intended to operate. But humans can rationalize. So let's just remember that reform is an ongoing process regarding what kind of entity, agency, corporation, company you're talking about. Let's go to the I in crime. Incarceration has got to be a tool to stop or at least deter felons committed to committing violent crimes. I say to many people, catch and release might work okay for walleye, but it doesn't work very well for felons. And it doesn't. We've got prosecuting attorneys and judges all over the state of Minnesota willing to allow plea bargaining from 8-10-year sentences down to a few months. That's a problem. The M in crime stands for, this is a Minnesota problem. This isn't just a Minneapolis Lake student problem from 20 months ago. This is a Minnesota problem. And you deserve to go to the E in crime. You deserve to hear engaged voices of all the folks across Minnesota. We have too many politicians. Try to be cautious about what they say, because it might be used against them at the next election. If they go too far this way, or if they go too far this way. That's not the way we should be governing. We should be courageous. What else are we seeing after having lost 25 times in a row? We're seeing education fundamentally changed. We're seeing not be foundational in nature, but instead it seems indoctrinational. Critical race theory isn't the first, and it won't be the last attempt at trying to corral and indoctrinate. If you think of why we have, if you will, mandatory education K through 16 years of age, it's really a selfish decision on the part of our country. We want our citizens strong. We want them to be able to read and write and do arithmetic, because if they can do those things, they can dream dreams, they can think of businesses to start, they can devise new inventions, and they can go pursue those dreams. That's why we do that. We need to change the way we do education. The last big idea in education, really, arguably, was a Democratic governor named Rudy Purkish in the 1980s. He put two initiatives into place, fought hard for them. PSEO, post-secondary enrollment option. This has been a good thing for a lot of people. They've been able to take the last couple of years of high school and turn it into something particularly productive, perhaps when they're being bored by the high school curriculum. We need to do more of that in the trades and in the technical areas. We need to have a post-secondary vocational trades kind of program so people can, in their junior and senior, do more, explore more pathways. The other program that came in the 1980s was open enrollment. I'm a family doctor, proud to be. It's a wonderful job. If anybody in here is thinking about the healthcare, I would encourage you to go for it, because it is truly a fascinating profession to be in. But I had a student in, not too long ago seeing me, and I asked him, gee, you look like you're doing pretty well. You got a good job, I see. You're 23 years old. You know, tell me your story. And he said, well, I was a terrible student. I was at the bottom of my class. And he said, I hated school. And I actually learned to hate anybody who did well in school. The only people I liked were the people that were as bad as I was. I said, well, what changed? And he said, well, my parents and I sat down and we talked about it. And we realized that the school district I was in, even though it was a fine school district for a lot of people, it wasn't for me. It really, if you will, emphasized sports. And he didn't want to play sports. Plus, he was a big, strong, burly kid, so he was getting a lot of peer pressure to play football. He didn't want to play football. He wanted to fix cars. He wanted to work with his hands. So he open enrolled into another school district. And he has done fantastically. In that school district, where all of a sudden, he was taking woodworking every year, drafting, auto mechanics, industrial arts. He was learning the way he best learns, hands-on. From there, he went on to do some post-secondary training, ended up getting a very good job doing mechanical things, helping create new processes, and he's on his way. Post-secondary enrollment option, open enrollment are big deals. We need to do something more. And I would submit that what we need to do in high school is we need to blow it open. We need to make more options available. And the best way to do that is fund the kids, not broken institutions. There's no reason to pick on teachers here. Teachers go into teaching because they want to touch kids' lives. But the system isn't working to help them do that. The three key stakeholders in our K through 12 education system have got to be students, teachers, and parents. We've got to open the door there. And the only way to do that is we've got to fund the kids. I understand, and you should too, that Johnny can always boomerang back to his home school district. So we need to make certain that the home school district has the dollars available to keep a spot for Johnny. But we can take a big chunk of the money devoted to our kids in Minnesota and let that follow the kids. So if they want to go to a home school, a private school, a charter school, we need to create more options. What else are we seeing after we've lost 25 times in a row? Well, we're seeing our prized system of elections compromised. And this isn't a partisan issue. This isn't a Republican issue. This is Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Independents. We should all be concerned. If you go back to 2004, there's a guy named Terry McAuliffe. He recently lost an important election in Virginia. He presented to the Democratic National Convention, and he shouted to the people there, he said, they stole the last election. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, he was talking about the 2000 election with the hanging chads. We don't have to quibble or bicker about this. We know that there are shenanigans going on, whether you're talking vouching or harvesting, absentee ballots. In Arizona, in Maricopa County, I had a chance to meet with one of the soldiers who participated, soldiers being boots on the ground, not military per se. But she participated in the forensic audit in Maricopa County. And I met with her for a couple hours and I said, tell me a couple of things that I should be aware of, what you found in Maricopa County. She said, well, I'll tell you two things. I said, perfect. And then she sent me the PowerPoint presentation, so I got a lot more back information, if you will. First thing she said was, I'm going to give you the good news. I said, what's that? She said, 282 dead people voted in our election. I said, that's the good news. She said, yeah, we thought it'd be more. All right, what's the bad news? This cut me to the core. Mail-in ballots? 9,000 more mail-in ballots were returned than went out. Now that's a problem. We don't have to quibble. We just have to fix it. What else are we seeing? Well, I would submit to you, and I think this is part of why you're here. I think the other thing we're seeing is we're seeing failed leadership. We're seeing a broken political system. Every legislative session in Minnesota that I was involved with, these were the things you saw with leadership. You saw an absolute commitment to seniority. You saw an absolute tendency that everything would be done behind back doors, secrecy. You saw omnibus bills. Even though Minnesotans across the state were saying, we don't want omnibus bills. We want single subject bills so we know how you feel about a given issue. You weren't getting that. We are seeing failed political leadership. Our career politicians are not cutting it. If you remember our founding fathers' wisdom, they said, citizen legislators, go down and serve for a period of time, then go back to your communities, the people who help nurture and grow you to be who you are. We're not doing that. My wife and I see the same things you do. And that was why last Christmas Day, after 6 months of soul searching, we made the decision, we're going to run for governor. This has not been a bucket list thing for us. We would rather have jumped out of an airplane with a parachute, truly. People ask me, are you sure you want to be governor? I said, I never said I wanted to be governor. I said I feel compelled to run for governor. I want to go down there for 4 years, solve a bunch of problems, and then get back to being a family doc. I'm 67 years old. People say, well, how about retirement? My wife and I have a pact. I told her, the day I turn 80, we'll talk about it. I told you, I've got the best job in the world. And speaking of that, I don't know if you ever saw the movie It's a Wonderful Life at Christmas season. There's a guy named George Bailey. I always sort of thought I've had a George Bailey life. In 2015-16, I was named Family Doctor of the Year. I've been a professor at the medical school for 35 years. I've always had that opportunity to have students and residents always challenge me. Just because I believe it, because I was taught it in the 1970s, doesn't mean that they're going to buy into it. That kind of challenge keeps you young, and it really keeps you searching and seeking new information. It's been a wonderful career for me. But if you go back 20 months, my life changed, and so did my wife's. Mary had 4 big surgeries within the matter of 18 months. These were surgeries that could have killed her. She came through all 4 of them wonderfully. She told me one day last year, she said, I feel better than I have in a decade. The other thing that was happening was I raised my hand, perhaps when I shouldn't have, but I raised my hand when the Department of Health and the CDC said, we want doctors to change the way you're doing death certificates. No longer do you have to identify the initiating event and the precise sequence of events that led to a patient's death. We want you to know that if COVID's involved, put it down as the cause of death. If COVID is not the cause of death, but a contributing condition, you can put it down as the cause of death. And by the way, we're not going to audit these things when you put them down. That's permission to go ahead and do whatever you want, right? I raised my hand, I said, this is wrong, we've never done it this way. I teach med students and residents how to do death certificates. This is going to catch up with you. What was my fear? That we would corrupt the data. People may not realize, but every year in America, we have 3 million people die. 1 out of 100 million, excuse me, 1 out of 100 Americans every year dies. So if you see 100 Americans tomorrow, 1 of them may be dead a year from now. That would be statistically what should happen. You hope it's not you. But the bottom line is, 650,000 people die every year of heart disease. 600,000 people die every year of cancer. What if all of a sudden that 650 drops to 450 and the 600,000 cancer deaths drops out of 400? Because we have those 400,000 deaths being coded potentially inaccurately as COVID. Well, can you think of what might happen? I can. I think you're going to have drug companies say, see, all these pills we've been pushing on you, they're saving your lives. We have found the Holy Grail. We found the fountain of youth. You just need to listen to us more and take more pills. That's what happens. These drug companies know how to market. They are going to take credit for the fact that we only have 450,000 cardiac deaths. I said, you're corrupting very important federal registrar data.
I thought someone would give me a call and say, hey doc, thanks for pointing it out, we'll fix it. Not what happened. Fast forward 2 months, June 2020. I get my first correspondence from the Board of Medical Practice, and it's not a Christmas card. They say, your license is under investigation because you're dangerous. You're spreading misinformation. What misinformation? You have to figure that out. I composed 75 pages of amendments and addendums. I wrote an 8,000-word response, and I waited on pins and needles for 2 months to see if my license would be altered, truncated, or removed. The allegations were dismissed. My wife and I celebrated with a glass of wine. That lasted about a week. Not the wine, the not being investigated. We got another letter. Now we're on 5 times. Next week, the Board of Medical Practice is supposed to investigate my 5th time. My wife and I, our life has changed. It's gone upside down. But we are absolutely all in. And we're in, I think, for the same reason why you're here tonight. You've got better stuff to do than listen to a Norwegian from Sleepy, Minnesota. You're here because the words of Esther 4:14 say this. Have you considered you're in the position you're in for such a time as this? In the early 1970s, when I was growing up, there was a thing called the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War changed, in part, because of people like you. You would not stand or stay quiet. You stood up. Kent State, kids died. They died standing up for their beliefs. But they turned the Vietnam War. They hinged our country. We pivoted, and the war ended. I think we're in that same kind of situation today, but worse. Because today the division is much deeper. It's much wider. And frankly, government has gotten much more casual about doing this to you. And if they did it to you once, they'll be much more comfortable doing it again. That's where we're at. So when my wife and I made the decision, we're running, we said, we've got to go out and meet Minnesota. For the last 9 months, we've gone out, north, south, east, west, and we've asked Minnesotans everywhere, what's it going to take to win, to advance conservative causes that want to safeguard the best within our society? You know what everybody told us? Virtually everywhere we went. They said, you need to energize people, and you need to throw a bigger tent. Ronald Reagan was the one who said that originally. But that's exactly what we were told over and over again, and it's true. If we're going to win, we need people like you helping to reshape the conservative movement. If the conservative movement is just going to be the same old 2 or 3 purity tests, how do you feel about pro-life? How do you feel about the Second Amendment? We are not going to throw a big enough tent. You know what I hear from folks like you on the younger side of the spectrum? I hear you saying, okay, what are the conservatives going to do about the environment, about conservation? What are you going to do about consumer protection in a day and age where you've got big tech and big pharma literally swamping us with their agenda? What are you going to do about corporate responsibility to behave ethically? What are you going to do about trying to make sure that the Constitution is indeed the recipe for America to go forward? Those are the kinds of questions we're getting from you. And those are the kinds of questions that have to reshape the conservative movement. Absolutely, I support the Second Amendment rights. I'm an avid hunter, not a very good shot. And I have enough guns because every time I miss a pheasant, I always think it's because of the gun, so I go buy another one. But the bottom line is, I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment, but I'm not going to stop talking about it. If you have a question and you want to have a conversation, we can do it. I'm a big fan of pro-life. I've had a chance to deliver 500 babies. I fought tooth and nail to make sure they had a chance to have a full life. But I'm willing to have a conversation with anyone on anything. Marijuana? I know you're not supposed to talk about that if you're conservative, but quite frankly, there's good evidence that trivial amounts of marijuana on a young person or an older person, but the example that I often use is if you're 19 years old and you're caught with a joint in your pocket, there is solid evidence that you have a much stronger chance of having the full force of the law come down on you if you're a person of color than if you're white. Well, that tells me that we've got to have a conversation. We've got to talk about decriminalizing, expunging records. How do we do this better? We don't have to talk about white supremacy or anything like that. We don't have to talk about critical race theory. We just have to say, there's an unfairness here, let's fix it. My stars, who are we? We're going to sit there and let something like that sit there and bake a while? Can't do it. These are the things that we have to talk about. And you're helping reshape the conversation, as well you should. So Mary and I had this conversation. We're going to energize you. And we're going to energize you because you're going to see a campaign like you've never seen before. We are going to behave abominably. We are going to be so transparent, people are going to say, what are you, stupid? And we may well say yes. Because quite frankly, if being stupid is being transparent, then call me stupid. And I always sort of like Forrest Gump anyway when he said stupid is as stupid does. So, we're going to have a different kind of campaign. We're going to energize you, but we're also going to throw a bigger net out there. Because we're going to go after you, and we're going to tell you that you need to be at the table, because my generation hasn't really solved that many problems. We've kicked the can down the road too much. We've been too hell-bent on the next election. We don't have term limits, and we've never had even an open debate about it, and we should. If you have someone serving 45 years in Congress, you have to ask, what is your ability to relate to the common person? We're not asking those questions. We have a political old guard that is running the system, choosing the candidates, and then in November telling you, this is your choice, this or this, and you're saying, I have to hold my nose whoever I vote for. We've got to change it. We have to change it. We need to go to the millennials and the Gen Zs and say, you need a seat at the table? Just because in 4th grade you didn't learn all 50 capitals in the 50 states like I did, you are way smarter than I am, way more intuitive, and if my iPhone or my iPad breaks, the last thing I'm going to do is go look for an old white guy. I'm going to go ask you guys, will you fix it, please? And you will fix it. I've noticed one thing about your generation at Christmas. When the kids are given a toy, you don't look for the instruction manual. That's what you're supposed to do, is what I learned. You look for the instruction manual, you follow A, B, C, D, and you go through the alphabet, and then at the end you got a toy that works. You guys just put it together in about a quarter of the time, and if it doesn't work, you'll make it work. We need you at the table. There is no reason for you to wait until you're 50 years old to participate. There's no reason we can't have a 30-year-old commissioner of health. There is no reason why you aren't at the table. We need you there. And we need to go to the communities of color. And we said, we need to understand better. Why do you think the way you think? What matters to you? Because when we go to communities that are minorities, when I ask them, what matters to you? They usually say the same 5 things that my wife and I say. We want to be able to take care of our family. We want to be able to honor our faith. We want to be free. We want less government. And we want to protect the unborn. Cool. We're pretty close. Let's work together. And the Republican Party, sorry to say this, someone undoubtedly be ticked when I say it, but I'll say it anyway. We've not done that good a job of honoring and respecting women. It has been a man's party. It's got to stop. We've got to recognize that women are really driving a lot of the show. If we need any confirmation, could we just talk about briefly the mama bears? We saw an energized group of people who said, I've had enough. And you know who they brought with them? The papa bears. And between the mama bears and the papa bears, we saw an activism that changed the world in Virginia and has given an awful lot of people hope across the nation. We need to respect that. If women say this is on the agenda, it's on the agenda. If women come down to the Capitol and you have legislators dismissing them, hoping that they'll just go away, that's got to stop. That's the path for us to win. Fast forward, 9 months later, Mary and I launched in March. Johann Goethe in the 1770s said, if you really make the plunge, if you really make a commitment, things will happen that you could never have guessed. I think a lot of people have experienced that in business and their personal lives. My wife and I certainly experienced that. If someone had told me that we would break all fundraising records and raise $1.2 million in the first 9 months, that we'd have 500,000 people following us on Facebook and TikTok, even if I got kicked off of TikTok 3 times. If they had told me that we'd have on Facebook and Twitter every day 500,000 people following us and we'd have more likes, I could respond to Governor Walz's posts and I would get more likes than he'll get on his post if you look at yesterday. Yeah. These are the kind of things that are going to happen. This is being fueled by you. If someone had told us that we would have 10,000 unique donors, I would have said, really? I just can't see all that happening. And yet that's happened. It's been because of you. There's an energy across Minnesota. You are here because you know that there's a time such as this, and this is crunch time. This feels like a fight for our own independence, for our own ability to stand up. You have a college that is a good college. They've done great things, and yet they're telling you, we're going to remove your ability to have a conscientious exemption. Folks, America was founded on conscience. Conscience means with science. This is the best you bring to the table. You use science to think thoughts, decide how you're going to live your life, and that's the direction you go. And you're being told, oh, by the way, if your conscience is driving you to say this or to say that, we're going to nullify it. You don't get to it. You need to stand up to that. You can't let that happen. So, those are the things that have happened in the campaign. That's the good stuff. What's the bad stuff? It's politics. I don't like politicians. They're not solution-oriented. They're too often worried about, let's not say something that'll be a gotcha moment down the road. If you say something controversial at your next election, someone might put it on a postcard and they'll do a mass mailing and you might lose the election. Big deal. Serve while you can and then get back to your community. That's ugly stuff. I hate the gotcha moments. I really do. There's too much cowardice in politics. Not enough of a moral compass and courage. My wife and I said, we are going to have a campaign that's going to be abundantly transparent. And we are going to resist getting gobbled up by groupthink. Many of you may not realize one of the worst examples of groupthink was in the late 1970s when Jimmy Jones was able to convince 1,000 people to peaceably drink Kool-Aid laced with cyanide so they could lie dead there. You're talking about kids that never got a chance to dream dreams or fulfill any of those dreams. Groupthink is a dangerous thing, and it's rampant in politics. And Mary and I said we are going to be unflinching. We're both 67 years old. We're old enough to realize that arguably we've lived 80% of our lives already. So if someone wants to throw slings and arrows at us, have at it. I hope you're a good shot, because we're not flinching. When I had my license investigated 5 times, I said, I am not stopping. I am like one of my wife's clients. My wife's a veterinarian. I know what some of her clients do when they get a pork chop in their jaws. They don't let go, and we're not letting go. So think of me as a pit bull. And we're going to speak for every Minnesotan. We're going to speak for the unborn, the people who are approaching the end of their lives. But we need to spend a little time talking about the people who live in the shadows of life. Why don't Republicans talk about this? Why don't we talk about the disabled, the challenged? Why don't we talk about the fact that PCAs, personal care attendants, that are helping these people with their bowel and bladder get paid $11 an hour? Seriously, folks? Would you want to be doing that? We have got to do better. These people are the least represented. Who's the most represented? I already mentioned it. Look at the stats. Big Pharma donates more money to legislators, politicians at the federal and state level than virtually any other industry sector. And meanwhile, you've got these people who live in the shadows of life, and it's a pretty darn tough life, and they can't hire a PCA because it's $11 an hour is what they're getting. Republicans have to lead on these conversations, not sit there and deny. That's what we're going to do. And lastly, we're going to take a page out of President Trump's playbook. We're not going to follow his bombastic Twitter style, not in your life. But we are going to trailblaze issues. When President Trump said, we're going to talk about NAFTA, people scoffed at it. But when he got done, both Democrats and Republicans alike said, you know, this NAFTA treaty has been improved. When he went after NATO and said, everybody needs to pay their fair share, people acknowledged that was a good move. You have to have courage to trailblaze the issues. And the way we're going to know what issues we need to trailblaze on are when you folks get involved. If you get involved, you will drive the shape of the conversation. I know that I'm an underdog. And I know that if I lose, I have not wasted my time. Because I have had a chance to participate in the conversation. I've had a chance to help shape it. If I say something, there's a good chance Governor Walz will respond. If I say something on video tomorrow, last Friday, I did a video because I was getting a tremendous number of phone calls. What about the variant? And what about the autoimmune disease that seems to be just rampantly upscaling? I did a 2-minute video. It went to 1.5 million people in less than a week. And the reason it did is because people were hungry for information about that variant. Is the B11529 South African variant that we now call Omicron, is it going to be that big of a death knell for us? No, it's not. That's the kind of information people want. And I am pleased that I get to shape the conversation. And I want to do it in a worthy and honest fashion. If I say something and I'm wrong, I want to confess, because I'm wrong plenty. I'll give you a couple of examples. Initially, I thought that this Wuhan COVID-19 virus did indeed come from a natural reassortment in probably 3 different species. I don't think that so much anymore. I think if you actually look at the signature of the virus, this may well have been a lab creation. I still don't know the answer, but I think I was probably wrong in being so certain a year and a half ago. I'm wrong a lot, and that's okay, because I'm a dynamic individual just like we all are. We learn and we grow. If we're not finding out that we're wrong, we're either stupid, dense, or we're not learning. Possibly otherwise dead. That's probably the choice, okay? So, that's what we're going to do. I want to do questions and answers today, but I want to close with a couple of comments. My wife and I have, at the time of our life, traveled to Minnesota and having conversations that we never thought we would have. I would ask you to do the same thing. Have conversations that you haven't had, and do them differently. If you think you've got the answer, swallow it. Ask people, why do you think that way? I don't see it that way. Help me understand. I can't get my arms around the way you see it. Stephen Covey in the late 1980s wrote a book called 7 Habits of Effective People. And one of the key ones was seek first to understand, then be understood. If we do that, we've got a way better chance of building bridges. And we have so much bridge building to do over the next several decades. I have never seen the medical profession so fractured. I have people who've never met me, and they hate me. They want me to lose my license. They don't care about the 3,000 or 4,000 patients I care for every day. They just don't like my politics. This is crazy. I'm not asking my colleagues in medicine to stand around with me, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya, but I would like a little bit of, if I'm not doing healthcare poorly, then, and you don't like my politics, could we at least just leave it at that? We need you folks in this room to be present and to be involved like never before. This is not my challenge. This is our challenge. It has to be. But this time, my voice will not be enough. My voice, which normally is targeted towards supporting my patients, this time I'm asking, can my voice be your voice? And the only way that happens is if you are willing to answer the question, will you let me be your voice? If you answer yes, then we can do what has to be done. We can build a groundswell movement, and in that movement, we can make history. And if we find in the last 45 days before the election in 2022 that Minnesota governorship is up for grabs, we will electrify the nation. Fact of the matter is, we will gain the attention of the world. They will say a blue state that hasn't voted for a Republican presidential candidate since 1972, up for grabs, hallelujah, let's have at it. So folks, I so appreciate having you be here as an audience. I get a chance to speak with you. I'd like to be able to answer your questions if you have them. Thank you for being here. First question. Did you have your hand up, ma'am? Okay, I know what your question was, yeah. She wanted to know, how did you meet your wife? She seems like a really intelligent woman, and you probably outkicked your coverage. Okay, that's fair. So I was getting on a bus, a 16A bus at the university in Stadium Village, and I was going over to St. Paul for organic chemistry. Cold January morning, 1975. Walking down the aisle, trying to find a seat. Everything's full. Finally, there's an open seat. There's a woman sitting there. I looked at her, I said, is that seat available? She said, yeah, go ahead. So as I sat down, I couldn't help but notice she seemed to be quite an attractive young lady. I'm Norwegian and Swedish and Danish, so I'm pretty skilled at building relationships quickly. You probably knew that. So I did the appropriate thing. I sat there and stood staring 15 seconds ahead. Didn't do anything. By then I felt like we had a relationship. So I glanced over her, and what I noticed is that she was holding onto an Erlenmeyer flask. An Erlenmeyer flask is fat at the bottom, skinny's up at the top. What made her flask interesting, I said what made her flask interesting, was the fact that she had encased it with aluminum foil. She caught me looking at her aluminum foil encased flask. I didn't know what to say, but it changed my life. I looked at her and I said, are you trying to oxidize an aldehyde into a ketone? Her eyes lit up. She told me several months later, she said, I knew that you were the one. She wasn't having a good time in organic chemistry. I was, so we got together. She's a veterinarian. I'm a family doc with 3 kids. Christy's an anesthesiologist. Matt's an attorney. We love them just the same. And Jack is a family doc as well. So folks, next question. You've already had yours, man. Yes, sir.
Would you support dismantling the Met Council and dismantling the fiscal disparities program?
The question is, would I support dismantling the Met Council and the fiscal disparities? Ask yourself the question, what is the Met Council supposed to be?
Sewer and water.
It's supposed to be a metropolitan planning commission. It's supposed to have limited powers. There's less than a half a dozen Met Councils in the country that have the power that our Met Council have. They have tremendous power. They have a budget larger than some states. They play politics. They need to either be imploded or reorganized at such a level you won't recognize it. The Met Council has done winners and losers. People say, light rail, what do you think of light rail? I think light rail is quite frankly a waste of money. And I want to tell you why. We have a weather pattern here that isn't the same as Chicago or New York or San Francisco. But even more importantly, basically mass transit systems have to be determined by your population density and the square miles that you have. Our population density in the 7-county metro area is less than 500 per square mile. What is Chicago's? And they've got the loop, the L. Theirs is almost 15,000 per square mile. How about San Francisco with their BART system? They're 18,000 per square mile. Let's take an example of a mass transit subway system that really works. How about Manhattan, okay? Well, the density is so high, they don't have room for a garage. If you don't have a garage and you don't have parking, you don't need a car, so you use the mass transit. The population density in Manhattan is 75,000 people per square mile. You can understand why it works. In Minnesota, we're way better off with rapid bus transit. It costs $150 million per mile of light rail. $150 million per mile. It costs $5 million per mile to build a 2-way dedicated roadway just for rapid buses. And if you happen to build a rapid bus line in a place where it isn't perfect and you need to move it or modify it, you have some versatility. You don't have that with light rail. We are already seeing some of our light rail on University Avenue heave. We have already gone way over budget on the Southwest line. Sometimes we make decisions because we think that if Santa Claus, that being the federal government, is going to fund 60 to 80% of a project, it must be a good deal. That doesn't make it so. We've already spent $400 million more on the Southwest line than we thought. We've exhausted our reserves. We have got to rethink it. The Met Council creates winners and losers. The big winners on a light rail is generally going to be the people who own the property along the intended line. They make buku dollars. In terms of the disparities, we've got to fix it. The best way to do that, quite honestly, is you're going to have to put people in place that aren't interested in being there 10 or 20 years. You want to get game changers in there. You want people who are change agents who say, we've got to fix this. So I'm with your question. I thank you for asking that. Next question. Yes, sir.
We recently had a lawyer who's writing the amicus brief for the Dobbs v. Jackson case, and she explained to us there's an amendment in the Minnesota Constitution that basically makes it impossible for pro-life laws like the heartbeat law in Texas to be put in the Minnesota state legislature. Even if the Dobbs v. Jackson case ends up revoking Roe v. Wade, what would you do as a governor to put pro-life policies through?
The question is a complex one, and as an attorney, I don't know all the statute and the case law. But basically the question is, as governor, what would I do to advance the cause of pro-life? Would that be accurate, sir? Okay. Well, governors don't generate legislation. They veto it or sign it. And if I get the chance to sign a pro-life piece of legislation, we're not just going to sign it, we're going to have a party. And we're going to celebrate. Thank you. If you get a chance, and there were several news sources that covered it, but I think it was yesterday, they had several of the Supreme Court justices comment on why they thought it was reasonable to look at Roe versus Wade. And I thought some of the comments were really interesting, and I can't remember which justice said which, but one said, well, why is it the purview? Why is the Supreme Court the arbiter of making a decision like this that arguably should be made at the state level? I thought that was interesting. Someone else said, why do we seem to behave like in America we're doing something so terribly wrong by re-examining Roe versus Wade? when there are many first world European countries that are far more conservative regarding allowing abortions. So I think that as we have this conversation, this is going to be a healthy conversation. I would hope that virtually everybody, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, could acknowledge that abortion is a wrong way for birth control to happen. I'm stunned when I hear people talk casually about abortion, because I have been on the delivering end of this newly cherished life, knowing that maybe a mile away there might be almost a similar gestational age baby being aborted. I don't get that. I've been accused recently that I can't be a very good pro-life candidate because when I was a resident in 1980, back when Alan Page was still playing football, and when Muhammad Ali was still boxing, and you could buy a house for $50,000, and Jimmy Carter was just saying goodbye to the White House, I was called on as a part of my residency to go to a Planned Parenthood clinic and do pap smears, treat STDs, and put women on birth control pills. This is how a resident gets the skills necessary to be an independent practicing physician. We have to have a certain amount of experience or we can't get board certified. I have never performed an abortion. I've never seen an abortion. So I don't think that something I did 40 years ago in fulfilling requirement should be somehow used to undercut my commitment to the pro-life cause. Next question. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion on electric vehicles and electrifying our transportation system?
There's no question. I would hope that virtually everybody would say that at some point in time, it would be a good thing for us to get off our dependency on fossil fuels. But I think it has to be organized. If we needed a wake-up call, I would think that the incomplete grid last winter that brought about deaths in Texas and surrounding states tells us that we have to be thoughtful. So let's just talk about this. We know that solar and wind can't give us the reliable grid we need. We know that we don't want to be dependent on fossil fuels if we can avoid it. Well, then can we please at least stand up and recognize that nuclear power is going to have to be a part of this equation? We can do nuclear power safely. We have never had a death in America because of nuclear power. Yes, there have been some in the world, but we can do nuclear power safely, and we have to. Now, to the electric car question, I don't think there's any question that electric cars will be a part of our future. But I would say this, I think it has to be done fairly. Why are electric cars now able to recharge free so that you driving your gas car are paying for that? And then why would we say that we're going to raise the gas tax to pay for more roads that both electric cars and combustible engine cars are going to be on? And when we don't have the battery question figured out, and we're talking about one of the coldest states in the union, does it really make sense for us to hook our wagon to California and their car mandates? This doesn't make sense. If we're going to buy a pickup and we can only drive 200 miles before the battery power goes out, is that really what people want to buy? And why would we have auto dealers and car salespeople be told by the government what they have to sell? That doesn't make sense. So I hope that answers the question. Next question. Yes, sir.
I'm deeply concerned for many in my generation. Just the other day I was driving and I saw a billboard that says 2 in 10 Chisago Lakes high school students reported using alcohol in the last 30 days. Something like that. And let me tell you, Dr. Scott, double it, triple it. Many of the people I went to high school with are now either doing one or multiple of drinking, vaping, smoking weed, and even harder drugs. So what would you as governor do to try to combat this epidemic?
The question is, what are we going to do about the epidemic of both street drugs as well as alcohol, marijuana, those kinds of things? I think you're going to have a devil of a time if you think you can solve this problem with a one-size-fits-all approach. This is not a cookie-cutter question. This has got to be dealt with at the local measures. When I was in Rotary, we had a DARE program. A lot of this is on the parents and the families, but we need to provide the support. Education is probably the most powerful tool we have to change human behavior. I'm oftentimes stunned at how klutzy doctors are when it comes to changing behavior. I once had a physician say, you told our mutual patient that if he lost 10 pounds, that would really be a good thing for him. And I said, yeah, where are you going with this? Is there a problem with that? And he said, well, he's 200 pounds overweight. I said, yeah, I still don't get the problem. What's the problem? He said, well, he needs to lose 200 pounds. I said, did you tell him that? He said, yeah. He said, I told him to ignore your advice. I told him, well, a pretty good chance that he'll not lose a single pound. He maybe gain 10 the next week. If you're going to try to get behavior change, you have to ask yourself, how are we wired? If we can have a small success, we can have another success. When we build, I tell people all the time, if you want to have a successful kid, somehow find a way to make sure that kid gets to be good at something. I don't care if it's tiddlywinks, doing hopscotch, or doing the broad jump, or doing a spelling bee. We need, as humans, to be good at something. Because when we want to be good at something else. And we have a better ability to celebrate someone else being good at something. We don't have to be green with envy. That's the way humans are best. We have got to do this. We have got to do education at the local level, and we've got to make it so that there's dollars available at the local level, and it's not being squandered. Your point's a good one. But it is interesting to me that in many European countries that treat alcohol not as we treat it in this country, it almost seems like there's a more responsible use. I know my sister many years ago was a foreign exchange student over in Germany. And I think when she went over there, she was 17, and the legal drinking age in Minnesota was 18, and she hadn't had much alcohol, to my knowledge, as a little brother. But the bottom line is, over there, in Germany, it wasn't uncommon for her to have a beer with her meal or something like that. And when she came back, she seemed to be a very responsible user of alcohol. So there might be a little kernel of wisdom in there as we look at how to do this as well. But I think it's got to be local control. One size doesn't fit all. Next question. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that you were banned off of TikTok. And I know earlier this year, Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida signed an anti-big tech censorship bill. If you are elected governor, what are your plans to stop big tech from censoring conservative politicians and political commentators?
I am not going to go after big tech and try to get them to be friendly to conservatives. I am going to get big tech to do their job responsibly. I am going to use the bully pulpit of the governor's office to make certain that every one of you, when you look at what's going on in the world around us, look through a lens that's triangular in shape. And a triangle has 3 points. And I want to tell you right here and now that there's an incestuous relationship on an ongoing basis that involves daily collusion, and it involves 3 entities. And you're talking about big tech, big pharma, and big government. These 3 entities are taking away our liberties, and we don't even recognize it. When I come out and tell you that I can save your life and take care of your cancer with this drug, and then I tell you, oh, by the way, the drug is $39,000 per month, $480,000 per year. I had a patient last week that has just been put on a $39,000 a month drug. I said, how in the devil can you afford that? He said, well, I applied for the patient assistance program, and they are paying the whole thing. Don't be swayed. This is a ploy. This is how drug companies take enormously expensive products, build a ground game where it starts to be used. They get physicians in the habit of using it. Physicians lose sight of what it costs. The patient will get it free for the first year, and then maybe after that's $3,000 a month. We have got to start protecting the consumer. Have to. Next question. Yes, sir.
So earlier you were talking about like how you can use your money. I don't quite know how it works, but like with your state districts, or not your state, but like your school districts, you can use the money to go to another school district. Especially with like COVID and stuff, homeschooling has gotten a lot more popular. Like, what would your opinion be of like being able to take that money if you could go to another school district, like, but to use it for homeschooling instead?
What I said was we need to blow open the options and make it a lot more available, and the money has to follow the child. In Mississippi, the average student, the average expenditure by the state for a student is $9,000. We used to way excel beyond what Mississippi's doing in terms of K through 12 performance. Right now, 4th and 8th grade Black and Hispanic students in arithmetic and reading in Minnesota score lower than in Mississippi. Mississippi averaged $9,000 per student. In Minnesota, we spend average $13,500, 150% of what Mississippi spends. I would submit that if we allowed 60% of those dollars, 60% of $13,000 being somewhere around $8,000, if we could have parents target that. Now, they don't get to put it in their checkbook, but they get to target it. Take homeschoolers. One thing we've learned from homeschooling in Carver County, where I come from, we have a powerful, robust set of parents that really do a good job homeschooling, and they form cooperatives. But there's an awful lot of homeschooling families that have found that in 2 to 2.5 hours, they can cover the kind of material that would take a whole day in a school. So why don't we give that money for the parents to direct, and maybe they would homeschool their kids in the morning to make sure that the basics are being covered, and maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday afternoons from 1 to 3, they create a joint cooperative science academy. And they do experiments with breaking up charcoal briquettes and put vinegar, which is acetic acid on, and watch the different rock formations grow. Stimulate these kids' ideas. Go ahead, and if it's not too offensive to you, maybe they could do something with worms and ants and things like that. I don't want to get in that kind of a contest tonight, but the fact of the matter is we can do things with worms and ants and monitor behavior. Have an ant farm, but some people might not like putting ants in a controlled thing. But when I was a kid, you'd have these things and you could watch the ants do their work and create tunnels. But the fact of the matter is we've got to stimulate the kids' ideas. That's what we have to do. So I think we need to blow it open and let the money follow the child. Next question. Just wait, I haven't seen any women ask a question for a while, so any women that have a question? Okay, then I'm going to come back to you, sir.
Regarding institutions, schools, and companies regarding requiring their employees to either take the vaccine or lose their job, and also to forcing the people to wear masks, what will your role be in those people who, and possibly the children who refuse to wear a mask or refuse to take the vaccine?
That's a big, complicated question. I'll take a little bit to unpack it. The question was in regards to masks in children, in regards to vaccine mandates. What would I do as governor? And if I didn't get it all, feel free to throw it out there. Folks, I don't know if you've ever seen this thing on internet, but if you just put in the Google box, still face, you'll see a 3-minute experiment done with like a 9-month-old child. The mother interacts with the child, the goo goo gaga, all that goes on. It's beautiful, lovely, very, very human. Then the mom turns away, tries to wipe off all emotion from her face, turns back to her 9-month-old and watches. The child quickly becomes agitated. It's gut-wrenching to watch this child try to evoke the same kind of response from, I can't remember the child, a boy or girl, from his mom just a few moments earlier. There's a real cost when we cover up the faces, and 3- and 4-year-old children don't get to see that. I think that when we have the physics that we know, and we put in place from 2001 to 2019 that says that cotton and surgical masks have 5-micron pores, that means the opening is 5 microns. And we know that a COVID particle is 0.1 micron. That's a difference of 50 times. Now, yes, that mask could bring about some collision of viral particles with the lattice work. Absolutely, I get that. But certainly that mask could not, and we said for 19 years, does not prevent you from getting the disease. And when the masks even further aren't fitted, and you've got gaps here and here and down here, and you've got great big burly beards, a beard absolutely messes up a mask. I'm surprised that we haven't been told that all Americans have to be clean shaven. Seriously, if you want to really do the job, you're going to have to do that. So I think masks have been a travesty, especially in children. And what really bothered me as a scientist is I followed this from 2002 with SARS-CoV-1, and I've watched what we do in masks, and I do surgery. I did a Bush Fellowship in surgery. I wear a mask not to make it so that you can't pick up the cold virus I might have. I never thought it would do that. I just want to make sure if when I'm cutting on you, you start bleeding and pumping blood towards my face, I don't want it in my mouth. And if I sneeze or cough, I don't want a big goober coming from my nose and landing on your open belly wound. That's why we wear masks. Don't make it any bigger than it is than that. If you want to wear a mask and have bigger impact, wear an N95 mask,
be clean shaven, have the thing be fitted, and then you can 95% of the time filter out 0.3 micron particles. Did you catch what I just said? 0.3 micron. But I just told you COVID particles are 0.1 micron, and the naked COVID virus is even smaller if it's not surrounded by a cocoon of hydrogen, water and lipophilic cocoon, and it'll be 0.08 microns. So the N95 mask is the way to go if you're really vulnerable, but don't think it stops, because you can get the disease from the N95 as well. Now, vaccine mandates. These are immoral. Go back 18 months ago. Look at Nature magazine, one of the highly regarded scientific magazines, Nature. If you look at that, there was a discussion, I think in April of 2020, that said, we're starting to see more and more people who have had COVID and recovered. These would be people at that time who were considered immune. They would be the only ones in our society protected. They would be immune. The article in that Nature magazine was, should we create an immunity passport? Should these people be allowed special privileges? These would be the people who might best be equipped to work in nursing homes, in a nursing home infiltrated with active COVID-19 disease because of some of the governor's policies where they pipelined active disease into the nursing homes. Should we have an immunity passport? That was the question. Hands down, it said absolutely not. This would be an unethical thing to do. Fast forward 15 months. Now we have the question. Now it's not an immunity passport. Now it's a vaccine passport. And by the way, the people we were talking about 15 months ago, they don't count. Doesn't matter if they have 10 times the amount of antibodies, they don't count because they didn't get vaccinated. There's no science there to back that up, folks. We're seeing it from Israel, United Kingdom, England, Iceland, Portugal. I know this will get me in trouble tonight because we're Facebook live streaming this. But you know what? These are the facts. These are the facts. Other question? Yes, sir.
Just to continue on that a little bit, we talked earlier, we spent some time in Florida, and Florida's been wide open for pretty much the whole time. And Florida is 50th in transmission. Minnesota is #1. #1. You can look at the map, today's map, all the northern states. In fact, the northern probably 7/8 of the nation is all red, all the counties. You get to the southern part of the states, of Texas and all that, they have very low transmission, and all of Florida is very low to moderate. Why? As a medical expert, why is Minnesota the worst?
I think we have to let the science breathe. We don't know. There was an excellent article in the Star Tribune today, written by, I think, an author in the New York Times. And I can't remember his name, but he said, can we stop the blame game? And he went on to elaborate how this virus has made fools of all of us. We have people proclaiming that this is going to happen, and it doesn't happen. We have epidemiologists saying this is going to be the worst thing that happens, and it doesn't happen. The fact of the matter is, we don't know. We do know that it's a small respiratory virus, and the most comparable virus that we can discuss and talk about is an influenza virus. So it makes sense that we would say, what have we learned there? We don't know why Florida's done so well. But if you're on this side of it, you'll somehow still find a way to pick on it. And if you're on this side of it, you'll support it. Why has Sweden done so well? Well, if you're on this side of the argument, you'll say, they've done terrific because they did the right policy things. But if you're on this side, they'll go the other way. The one thing I want to remind people is mental health isn't like strep throat. We are causing so much collateral damage. You don't get over anxiety, depression, bipolar, suicidal ideation just because the inciting trigger went away. It doesn't go away like that. It's not like strep throat getting a shot of penicillin. We have created an immense amount of collateral damage that we will have to deal with for literally decades. You can't do this to a human race without having consequences. I think some of you in this room, I don't know exactly your situation, but I'm going to guess that you may well have had one of those most momentous years in your life, your senior year in high school, absolutely devastated and decimated.
by some of the policies that, as we look back, they did nothing. Let me just go a little bit more on your question. I'm just going to say again, vaccine passports, immoral. But think of this. Why could you, during the first lockdown that started March 17, 2020, and then it ended in summer, why was everybody running around with long hair? Remember? Because barbers and hairstylists weren't essential and they weren't safe. Fast forward 6 months. The second lockdown was November 18th. We didn't see long hair during Thanksgiving and Christmas. You could get a haircut. Why was that? A few days before that lockdown was announced, the plan was barbers and stylists would be shut down just like they were the first lockdown. But then they weren't. Was that science? Or was that a backroom deal? Let's think on that one. Next question, yes, sir.
So kind of a caveat to each question. So I know with a lot of like right now the mask mandate or the vax mandates and mask mandates, it's been kind of like the government's been not forcing it per se yet, but the state has been kind of like pushing for these businesses to make their own decision on implementing their own mandates. Would you be putting the legislation, like I know in a few other states, that have been considering that, making so businesses cannot force anyone to do that themselves and up to the decision of the employee?
If you're a business and you want to be able to force someone to take a vaccine, the only way I can see that being legitimate is if you do it at the front end when you're hiring the person. If you're hiring someone that'll be working only with children recovered from leukemia and recovering now from a bone marrow transplant, and you need to do everything you can to keep the environment sterile because their immune systems are just perking back up, that has to be something that you do when you hire them. If you do something once employment has started, you don't get to treat people that way. If you take someone and allow them to work for you, and they've been a good employee for 25 years, and they've now reached some of the upper pay scales in your company, but you know this person has strong feelings about forced vaccinations and doesn't take flu vaccines, wouldn't this be a convenient way for an employer to abuse that employee and say, we're going to put in place mandatory influenza vaccines? Would employers do that? Well, I think when employers are desperate and they're worried about closing the doors, I think we have to do protection for employees. So as governor, I would not allow, if you will, employees to have a vaccine mandate imposed upon them. I think we have to stop thinking that it's okay to abuse people's freedoms and make them violate their core convictions if it's in the name of public health. If we're truly going to be encountering some existential threat to mankind, which certainly COVID-19 is not, I think education is still going to be the tool that helps people make the decision that's best not just for them, but for the human race. I'm convinced of that. But the idea of using coercion and a sledgehammer has demonstrated to us exactly that even Tony Fauci can't get 2/3 of his people in his department, in his agency, to be vaccinated. We don't just have a few people not vaccinated. We have millions and millions and millions, approximating somewhere around 1/3. And if the definition of fully vaccinated is going to include the booster, then you have more than 50% of Minnesotans not fully vaccinated. There's a lot of folks that are aware of the fact that the second shot can be more problematic than the first, and the booster is worrisome, that would it be even more so. I'm just going to say one thing about the VAERS scoring, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. This is run by the CDC. I think it started in the early 1990s. It's always been the go-to agency for data. It was the thing that helped us realize that the Lyme vaccine was not working and it was withdrawn from the market. It helped us recognize that rotavirus was killing kids with intussusception and bowel blockage. That rotavirus vaccine was pulled from the market. It's always been
what we consider a valuable, trustworthy data source. And somehow, in the last 12 months, it's been literally dismissed. So we've had to go to Israel and the United Kingdom and other data sources. But even the CDC has acknowledged that 20% of the 18,000 deaths that have been reported on the VAERS program, 20% of those have occurred in people within 48 hours of receiving the vaccine. Now, I'm not going to speak for other doctors, but I'll tell you this. When I do vaccines in the office, and I spend $150,000 a year buying vaccines for my patients, my kids are fully vaccinated, I've got tons of vaccines on my belt and all that. I just pick and choose the ones I think I want, because not all diseases are equal, and not all vaccines are equal. But when I think about 20% within 48 hours, I ask myself, when was the last time I ordered a vaccine for my nurse to give the patient when the patient was sick? I don't. If I have a patient with 101 fever or something like that, I don't give a vaccine. I say, get well first, then come back in, and we'll give you your, I don't care what it is. I don't like vaccinating sick people. So if the CDC is telling me that 20% of the people, of the VAERS data is accurate, that it's within 48 hours, there's got to be a tremendous amount of those. Even though we can't establish causation, we've got to incriminate the vaccine. Yes, Sharon?
I just want to make a comment that a lot of people, we're 11 months out from the election, and everybody keeps saying, what are you going to do as the governor, as vaccine mandates and mask mandates? And right now, if you guys that we're here, it's we the people. It's mask non-compliance. There's more of us than them. I have never worn a mask once. I live in Minnesota, I fly, I've had the police called on me. I met Dr. Jensen May of 2020. I had done so much research. My father worked at 3M for his entire career. I had pulled the N95 literature and read it myself. I knew that the mask didn't work. And I stood my ground the entire time. And what he's asking us to do, we're looking for a leader, but what he's asking us to do is to join him. We need to get involved. You need to stand up. If you know what's going on in Australia right now, they had, obviously you guys made noise, so you know what's going on. 3 boys, 16, 17, and 17, were in isolation camps, quarantine camps, away from their homes, and they snuck out at 3 in the morning. Literally, they had 6 police officers and 2 dogs looking for these boys like they were criminals. What's going on is insane, and it's time to get involved, and civil disobedience of not complying is going to happen. If you know what's going on in the rest of the world, we need a governor and a leader, and this is the guy, but you can't wait to say, what are you going to do for us then? We got to do it now, because if we get to November of 2022, we're going to have a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. One last question, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you so much for 2 last questions. You, ma'am.
If you're elected, what would be your plan to restore and protect the image of police?
The image of police? Well, I think you can always use your bully pulpit and support them. I don't think Governor Walz has done that. I think if the city wants to vote to defund the police, I would just tell them, don't expect me to give you any dollars that I'm not absolutely obligated to give you. We're going to make it hurt. I think that we need to understand and probably do some sort of a public campaign to let people know these are not the enemy. The police are the people who live next to us, who drive our kids to daycare, who pick up our kids from Little League and take them home, who teach Sunday school. This is astonishing, this mindset we're living under. And it's wrong. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, this is on Governor Walz and Jacob Fry. Next question.
I was going to add to what the woman back there said. Those 3 teenagers in Australia were caught, charged $5,000
Yes, they were.
for the Australian equivalent each, with plans to increase CCTV presence around such camps.
The whole concern regarding Australia, again, I think there were so many people 2 years ago who would have always thought of Australia as a neat place to visit, a place that seemed like they did things pretty well. I can't, and I'm really editorializing here. I have no hard data to support this opinion, but I just think that there have been very few countries that have taken the public relations hit that Australia has. And they had this bizarre notion that they were going to pursue COVID-0. There is no such thing. This COVID virus, this was like when, remember when we had the curfew, you had to leave and go home at 11 o'clock and 10 o'clock because evidently the COVID virus acts a lot like a mosquito and it come out at 10 o'clock in the night. I mean, good grief, folks. Folks, you've been a great audience. I'll hang around a little bit. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you all for coming. For those of you who want to stick around, Scott Jensen will be here. If you want to get involved in the campaign, there's a sign-up sheet right over here along with some literature. Thanks all for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks again to Scott Jensen.
drscottjensen.com. DrScottJensen.com.